Hey everybody, this is Andrew Troelsen here. A few weeks ago I gave a talk at the Intertech open house party that talked a bit about Windows 8 and Metro style apps and this crazy new thing called WinRT. Well, it turned out we had a little bit of a glitch during the first couple of slides of the recording, so I'm just going to redo that right now, get everyone kind of caught up to speed here. So the presentation that you're going to be watching right now, it's kind of, it's a short amount of time to talk about some pretty heady topics. We have about an hour talk, and the big thrust here is to really help people understand what Windows 8 could possibly mean. And when I wrote this presentation, I tried to do it from three different points of view. The user perspective, just those people who might be loading up Windows 8 and running applications, what are they going to see? How's it going to look different for them from what they've been used to for quite some time? And then, of course, my personal comfort zone, developer perspective. How is this going to affect developers like us that are trying to build applications for this new operating system? And we have to also keep in mind the bottom line of the moolah. So we'll talk a little bit here too about the business perspective and how things might look from that level. And also, as you go through the talk, I'll be pointing out various places you can go to get more information online. So to kind of just get us in a good, comfortable starting point here, I've been programming myself with the Windows operating system for a long time, longer than I care to admit. But I used to write software for Windows 3.1, and then we got work groups, so it was 3.11. And way back in the day, of course, I was working on applications that made use of the Win32 API, and that looked pretty darn different. And then we had Windows 95 that came out, and that was really a pretty significant change for the UI. And over the course of a number of years, we've been getting different refinements on that model. From Windows 95, well, we had ME, but whatever. But the next big redesign was probably XP, and that brought us here now today at Windows 7. Now, even though there's been plenty of internal changes, new APIs and so forth, the basic look and feel of these operating systems is pretty consistent, right? We have the Start button / Windows button. Users are comfortable with that. They know how to go ahead and decorate their desktop with their favorite launch items, and it's been kind of the same for quite some time. But again, if you do remember back here in the day, doing Windows 3.11 stuff, getting from that point to this point was pretty monumental. And a lot of other people have said this too, and I would agree. I would say that going from Windows 7 over to Windows 8 is just as monumental. So here are a couple of screenshots, and during the presentation you're going to see that I'm going to flip over to Windows 8 through a virtual image, and I'll kind of poke around a little bit. But just when you boot up the operating system, you're going to notice a completely different look and feel. This right here is the new default start screen. And all these little tiles right there, okay, those are what we call Metro style applications. And they are a very, very different beast from a traditional Windows desktop application. And they're certainly a very different beast from a traditional website, right? Now, the one thing I want to point out real clear is that this is not the only way to view your Windows 8 operating system. In fact, one of the tiles is a button, and you can actually see it right here. For this build of the preview, the icon looks like a little fish in a tank. If you click on that, that'll bring you back to the more traditional looking Windows desktop, right? And you'll see that as we kind of go through the talk. So if I were to click on any other tile, chances are pretty good, I'm going to launch what we call a Metro style app. And I'll further qualify what that means as we go, but here's just an example of like a cookbook application written for this Metro user interface. Very, very different look and feel, very different set of mechanics, and a whole completely different technology stack that we use to build those things. One thing which is kind of neat though is that a Metro style app, such as this guy, and a traditional desktop application can sit side by side. So it is possible for the end user to kind of have the best of both worlds a little bit. Now, as we're going to go through the talk, we're going to see that some of the big changes of Windows 8 is that they are highly optimized for touch screen input. You know, this is a requirement, right? Your Metro style apps will need to be responsive to touch because Metro style apps can run on a whole bunch of devices, whether it be a traditional desktop PC, a laptop, a slate, touch screen, whole gamut of different machines. Oops, sorry about that, guys. Now, one thing which is kind of nice, though, is that this fairly radical redesign of Windows 8, it does bring things consistent across many different Microsoft products. So if you're like me, you're probably a gamer, and you know that the Xbox home page, if you will, got a pretty big redesign, and that also has this tile mentality. Windows Phone 7 also has a tile screen, and now the Windows operating system itself is going to have this same basic symmetry. One thing which is kind of cool to know is that if any of you guys have looked at the Visual Studio 11 preview, they have a new project template now you might be interested in called a portable library project. And this allows you to build a DLL which only references libraries that would work across all these different devices. And that can be a really big time saver if you're trying to get a common body of code, business logic, and so forth that you want to reuse across different devices. Now, instead of having to guess, is this going to work over here or will it not work over here, this new portable library project template will keep us honest. It won't let you reference things that won't work across all devices. Okay, so during this demo, here is basically how I set up my, oh geez, I don't know why it keeps showing me that. Here's how I basically set up my machine. I've installed VirtualBox, right? So you can download VirtualBox for free. And once I had VirtualBox installed, I went ahead and installed the Windows 8 Developer Preview Tools. And that gives you all the different current builds for things like Visual Studio and Blend 5, and also just the raw SDK. And then, of course, we have to have a suitable operating system, so I installed the Windows 8 preview. And again, here are all the links on how you can get all the bits that you need. One thing that you need to know is that you simply cannot build a Metro-style app on Windows 7. It's just not possible. You have to have Windows 8 to even begin to think about a Metro-style app, because there's a whole different runtime and a whole different set of libraries used in the background. In fact, if you were to install the developer previews on top of Windows 7, it doesn't even show you any of the Metro templates. So just be aware of that. And again, later on during this lecture here, I'll be flipping over to VirtualBox and we'll fire up Windows 8 and take a peek. So what exactly is a Metro-style app? Well, it's a lot of things, but one thing you should know from the get-go is that it isn't a traditional desktop app from the user's perspective or from the developer perspective, okay? Now, this doesn't mean that your existing skills are just like out the window, right? We do have some things that we can bring with us as we learn this new set of APIs. And this also doesn't mean that you couldn't build a traditional desktop program for Windows 8. You certainly can. So if you wanted to build a traditional desktop application, you would fire up Visual Studio 11, you would pick maybe a WPF project template, and you would just build your application. But if you want a Metro-style application, there's a whole different set of services and programming techniques, and even in some cases languages that we can use in the background to do it. But just know for right now that some things which are not going to change are your current skills. So the .NET platform doesn't really go anywhere. The .NET platform is still a key part of Windows 8. It's just that that would only be used for a traditional desktop application, or of course if you're building a website. But a Metro-style application is going to tap into a whole new set of services.
Now, and here's the crazy start screen. Okay. My resolution's a little bit off here just because of my virtual image, so that usually would be pretty tight, but don't let that part fool you. But now, first thing I want you guys to notice here if we look at some of these tiles, you see how they kind of update and roll and spin and there's like life to them? That's actually kind of like a requirement. There's actually like specs in their vetting process that say how it should look from the tile point of view. They want these tiles to be an extension of your application. Okay? So, we got a bunch of different tiles here, some of which would launch back to the desktop. So you notice here, for example, I got Blend for Visual Studio, right? We also have Visual Studio itself. Those are not Metro style apps, right? See, not every tile has to be a Metro style app. I could fire up a command prompt right now, okay? But there are certainly these Metro style apps, such as maybe weather. So let's see what we get here. Now, this kind of gives you a little glimmer as to what the vision is, right? They want to really focus on content, right? So more content, way less crow. So as I go through this application, I can get forecasts. I can go ahead and get maps, right? Little historical weather charts, and I've already plugged in here to St. Paul. Okay. What just happened there is that's the new activation when you click on the Windows Start key on your computer, right? This gets you toggle between at least the last two applications. If you have a whole bunch of things opened up, I'll show you how that works too. Let me open up maybe Maps. Okay, here we are. Right? So if I have both these apps running right now, there's this one little odd feature, and I'll talk more about this as we go here, but Windows 8 is really pushing touch screen devices, right? This is a OS which is really heavy on the slates, okay, and the touch screen monitors and so forth. I don't have a touch screen in this computer here, so I'm going to emulate it with the mouse, right? But if you hover your mouse on the upper right or upper left of the OS, magical things happen, right? If you were on a touch screen device, you would be swiping left and right, okay? So up here, I can cycle through apps that are currently on my desktop, right? Over here, and I'll talk a bit more about this stuff a little bit later, but we have these odd things called charms, which are hooking into these programming concepts called contracts. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, okay? Now, what about this guy, the desktop? Hey, look at this. Okay? Now, this is where we would go to run what we would consider to be normal everyday Windows apps, right? I would come here to fire up PowerPoint or Visual Studio, okay? But remember, we also have this ability to work with things kind of together, right? So I just snapped that. Where'd it go? I think there it goes. Whoops, sorry guys, my resolution is kind of fighting me here. But what I basically did here, you see how it says snap left, snap right? That's where I can basically say, well, I want to still see the weather as I'm doing stuff with my Visual Studio programming. So here's like that hybrid of, well, I have the Windows desktop running, but I also have these Metro style apps in the background. Here's another important thing about Metro style apps. I showed you the big, humongous version of the weather app. This is another thing you have to consider. You're kind of writing three different versions of the same app. You got the crazy fancy tile, right? You got the full Extendo app, and you got the Snap version of the app. And all three of these things are considered, okay? And just because of time, I guess I'll probably stop with that. But you kind of get the taste of the basic idea of the Windows operating system. I'll come back here for some other things too, but just for a first look, is that okay? Okay. And certainly afterwards, we'll have time for questions and so forth. All right, so that's just a wee bit of taste as to what the new operating system looks like. Now, I just showed you how traditional desktop apps are still supported just fine, right? So I could have launched right there Word, right? If you are going to be building an application for Windows 8 and you want it to work like a normal app you would see on Windows 7, you're just going to use the .NET platform like you're using it today, right? You would just fire up Visual Studio, make a new WPF app, and build your software, right? No fundamental change there at all, okay? But if you want to build one of those fancy schmancy Metro apps, that is a different story, okay? So again, just kind of put this into perspective. This is what we are very, very used to today. We're kind of used to seeing desktop applications that have this huge amount of Chrome, right? And that, in many applications, kind of becomes the centerpiece, right? And this is not to say it's bad. There are some applications where that's absolutely mandatory, okay? One thing that you shouldn't think is that every single app needs to look like a Metro-style app, right? Some apps that just would not make any sense. Like imagine Visual Studio as a Metro-style app. That would be pretty tough, right? There's so many important menu systems and external tools and debuggers and visual designers and so on, right? One thing that I found helpful as I was kind of playing with this technology drop is, kind of consider a Metro-style app is like an app for the cell phone or the desktop. You know what I mean? In fact, the life cycle is very similar too. It'll go through an activation, deactivation cycle, right? Just like a cell phone app, when you kind of put it in the background, it comes back to life. A lot of those same things are happening for a Metro-style app. Okay? All right, now, anyone get a chance to go to the build conferences that just happened? No? Anyone go online to look at some of those talks? A lot of great stuff out there. I have a link there too, right? For those that want to really go deeper into these topics, go to the Build conference website. There's like a bazillion videos, white papers, and so on, right? But one of the presenters there, he was kind of presenting with maybe the 8 core things to keep in mind as you're considering building a Metro-style app. Okay, so what I want to do now is kind of go through these ideas and then talk about not just the user's point of view, but how would we program this stuff too. Okay, so I'm not going to read those out loud right now because I'm going to go through each one in turn. Okay, so let's start with the design, right? So here's a side-by-side comparison of a feed, news feed, right? Over on the left, we have what you might see today on Windows 7, right? Notice again all the Chrome, okay? Over here on the right would be the revisioned idea for a Metro-style app, okay? So that's where we really kind of bump into the animations, the graphics, the eye candy. Okay, that is a really important part of the application now, right? I think for a lot of us that are building lots of business applications, we kind of put that in the background, which is okay for a lot of business applications, right? It's just like, well, I just got to have a big grid of data. I got to touch up a database and show it and let people edit it, right? That's great. But here, that is much more of a front and center piece now. Okay? So we have a definite different look and feel from that first look. And I think that can be summarized right about here. Remember, Chrome to a minimum, content to a maximum. Okay, that's kind of like the new mantra. As I mentioned, that's not to say every single application has to be repurposed into a Metro-style application. I would hate to use either one of those tools as a Metro-style application, right? That would be just bizarre, okay? And that's where, again, I found it helpful to think about it like a smartphone app for the desktop. That model seems to work pretty well, okay? In fact, there were some pretty cool demos at the Build conferences about, hey, look, here's a Windows Phone 7 app that we wrote with Silverlight. Magic, magic, magic. Now it's a Metro app, okay? Now, another big war cry that they're talking about is this tagline. Pardon me for even saying the tagline, but fast and fluid, right? Now, this is another big difference. Remember that Windows 8 is really about working on multiple different devices, really pushing touchscreen technology. So your apps have to respond to touchscreen, or else you ain't going to get through the vetting process. In fact, it's not just they respond to touchscreen like if I click it, it does something. You have to work with this new language, this whole touch language, okay? So there are APIs which allow you to program an app to respond uniquely for each one of these little touch features. Yeah?
You know the Apple touches, are these going to drive you crazy, or are they related?
Yeah, the question was, if you already know how to work on a Mac, or an iOS device, are these going to drive you crazy? Oh, they drove me crazy. So, well, you know what? I read a great post by some guy. I honestly don't remember the guy's name. He was doing a review of the latest drop of Windows 8. He says, well, it's kind of like if you don't know how to skate and you jump on the ice and you start slipping and sliding everywhere, then you gain your footing and you start to glide. How's that for a flowery analogy?
Well, that's really how it was with learning the
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and, you know, new technology is like the two-edged sword of our profession, right? That's just the way it is. So, yeah, when I first saw it, too, I was like, yeah, right, you know, and you just kind of get in there and play. I'm still fumbling a bit myself, for sure, but you get more proficient as you go, right? So, again, there is this whole entire touch language that they've developed, and your applications have to be responsive to these gestures, okay? And I'll talk a bit more about the APIs behind that as we go here. We're already getting a taste about how it's different, right? It's not just the app on the desktop running, right? Now, here's a good programmer thing. Here's a piece that you can take away right now, even if you don't give a hoot about Metro style anything. In .NET 4.5, C# and Visual Basic both have these two new keywords, which are ultra cool. Async and await. You guys have looked into that yet? Multi-threading? How many people love to do multi-threading all day long? Oh, you guys are just brutal people. Oh, how many people love to do asynchronous delegates all day long? Oh, well, not me, right? You know, as Microsoft has kind of pushed the framework forward, you probably agree. They keep adding more and more stuff to make it easier, right? Like Task Parallel Library, big fan. That's awesome. TPL, okay? Well, what the new drop of the languages give us are these new keywords that really do a lot of that for you in the background now. We now have language keyword support for asynchronous calls. So instead of you writing a bunch of complex threading code to say, start that thing, now I'm going to wait in the loop, now I got to see if you're done, now you tell me you're done, that's all relegated now to language keywords. Okay? Little word of wisdom, though, doesn't mean you're completely off the hook. Okay? The biggest thing is, if you haven't already done so, please be good to yourself. Check out this namespace now, right? System.threading.tasks. That was introduced in .NET 4.0. Okay? So that's already out now, right? That's in 2010 right now. This is sort of a more modern framework built on top of system.threading, which is really elegant, right? Another word of wisdom, if you're going to go here, know your lambdas. Right? Fear not the lambda, because you're going to use those a whole bunch when you're working with the TPL. Okay? You don't have to. This can make your code a lot cleaner. Right? So you need to know a bit about this task parallel library to really tap into these keywords. Okay, so let me show you another quick little demo. Now, whenever I'm learning new technology, I'm not the brightest bulb in the tree. I got to go with simple. I want the easiest, simplest thing. Let me think about it for a while, then I'll build on top of it. Right? When I first started looking at these new keywords, I'm like, well, here's something I always have to fight with. I got this user interface. If the user clicks there, bad things happen because now we're all waiting, right? So let's look at this little sample code. I'm going to pull up the Visual Studio in a second here. So Windows Forms app, right? If the user clicks on that button, what's going to happen? I'm going to call some method, and they're going to wait for 10 seconds. Now, what happens to the UI? Yeah, it's totally dead, right? They can click all day long and nothing's going to happen, right? Users don't like that. So what would we do now? Well, now we'd be thinking about, okay, time to write some threading code. Right? Now I got to write all this complexity into the framework. But let me show you how we can do it nowadays. Okay, so here's a little app, right? And I think right now, do I have it set up to no async? Yeah. Well, you know how to wait. I don't have to do that for you, do I? You know what'll happen. It'll be bad and boring, so I'll pretend that we already did that part. So let's just look at the code real quick, though, side by side. Okay. I'll comment this part out in a second. I'll do it right now. Okay. So, pretty small. Better? Okay. So the same thing is going to happen. The user is going to click a button, right? But now I'm not going to have to wait. I can start typing in my text box right away, right? And whenever that thing is done, program goes back to that other thread. Okay, so let's look at the updates here. So first of all, let's look at what I did to the method. So I'll put up the side by side. Okay, so here was the original do work, right? Remember I said that you have to kind of be willing to play around with the task parallel library? Notice the change in turn value. If you have an async method, you're going to be working on this data structure called a task. Okay, that's a class in the task parallel library. The actual return value of the original method becomes the type parameter of the task. This is a generic. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, as a naming convention, Microsoft recommends that you tag on the word async as a suffix. That's what they're doing in their framework right now. You can go to all these different namespaces and say, oh, look at all these methods that have the word async. That means it is an awaitable method, right? By awaitable method, that means you can use the await keyword when you call it to let that other thread get spun up automatically, okay? Now, I'll certainly talk about this in detail afterwards, but I should probably tootle along here. But let me just go ahead and run the app. Right? So there's, now I can type now because I haven't clicked the button yet, right? If I click the button, I can still keep typing. Now watch the title bar. It'll eventually say that it's done with the work, which I think is pretty sweet, right? So that's just a little taste about how this idea of fast and fluid actually has found its way into the language primitives, right? So when you're building Metro-style apps, these can be your good friend, right? Make sense? And remember, too, now that's not limited to Metro, as I just showed you. It was just a blase Windows Forms app, right? So you can use those keywords under any version or any application as long as you're doing .NET 4.5, okay? Snap and scale beautifully. Remember, we're getting an operating system here which is intending to run on multiple devices, right? Tablets, slates, full screens, media centers in the living room, right? That's meant to run on all these different types of settings, okay? So we need to start thinking a little more carefully about scaling. There's actually a set of different scaling guidelines, right? And maybe the strangest and slightly most scary thing is that if you have a Windows 8 machine, which is in the wrong resolution, and you try to launch a Metro-style app, it just won't launch. It'll just say, I can't run. I'm in the wrong resolution.
Are you there?
Yeah. Yeah, I can actually show that real quick here. Let me go back to here. So if I were to try to fire up maps now, right? Now, good thing is the new drop of Blend, it has these really nice built-in tools to help you see how things look when you scale, right? And it also has these nifty tools that show you how you look when you go into a snap state. Okay? But that's another consideration to think about. Talked about that snap state. Remember when I put the weather thing next to my desktop? That's what I'm talking about. And this is, again, something you got to think about. We all do, right? If we're going to build a Metro-style app and submit it to the App Store and say, yes, let's sell this and get some money, they're going to be looking at how do you work in a snap state, because that's kind of like a mandatory prereq. That's why I was saying you're kind of building three apps, right? You got the fancy, funky tile, right, on the Windows Start page. Then you got the full screen app, and you got this little miniature snap version. Okay? Yeah. You can do one on the left and one on the right, and then the content in the middle. Yep, good question. question, if you couldn't hear it online, you only get one snap state for the OS, and you get one on the left, one on the right, and then one in the middle. Okay, still with me on these pieces here? Okay. Another piece, too, charms and contracts. More terms to stomach and swallow. All right, so the underlying runtime for this whole Metro world, which is called WinRT, talk about that in just a bit. It has this collection of APIs that are called contracts, right? And contracts are ways for Metro-style applications to communicate between themselves. That's the other weird thing, man. They are pushing the connected all the time model, right? So if you're running your Metro-style app, you can tap into different contracts to say, well, I want my application to share its data with other applications on the computer, right? And a great example might be like this little painting program. You might say, hey, I just loaded up a painting program. I painted this awesome picture, right? And I want to feed it up to Facebook. Well, you could just do that right inside the app now if you tap into that share contract, okay? Another good example of a contract is the search contract. And that one I can show you real quick, too. Sorry, I keep bouncing back and forth with the whole virtual thing, but that's the best I could do. So let's see, if I were to do, I'll just do it this way. Okay, let's go back over to these little charms. Okay, so charms, these kind of pull out when you're in the start menu. The charms are kind of like the user's experience. Programmers would be saying, let's talk contracts, okay? So, like, if I were to go to the search charm, right? Well, now I get a chance to say, I want to search something, and I want to search within any of these things on the computer to find it. If I were to type in Minneapolis, I'll say, well, no apps have that word Minneapolis. How about maps? This might take a second because I'm virtual, but that should eventually zero in on Minneapolis through Bing Maps, right? Yeah, okay. I could say anything in Minneapolis in weather. It would fire up the Minneapolis weather, right? So if you built a Metro-style app that wired up to the share contract, right, then if your app wanted to receive that data, they could receive it and do stuff with it.
Hey, Andrew, real quick.
Yeah.
How does the snap state requirement apply to games that don't make sense in less than full screen resolution?
Then it's not a requirement. In that case, you probably wouldn't even care about a Metro-style app, right? You know, at that point, you might just build a normal everyday app for Windows 8 that runs under the desktop. You could have games, like there is a game that ships with this here, this little pinball game. And they do have a snap state, but it kind of puts the game in suspension, like a pause screen. You know what I'm saying? That's a really cool question. Another fellow gamer, so, yeah.
So it looks almost as if the charms is something we've been hearing a lot about, which is getting away from a program-centric view of the user.
Yes.
To what information do I
Yes, that is very well said. Yes, we're trying to pull away from apps being an island unto themselves to apps working in a big, beautiful infrastructure, right? Everyone's talking and sharing.
Okay, so a follow-up question. So don't they have to be Metro-style to get into the Windows App Store?
Yes. Yep. But you don't have to build only Metro-style apps in your Windows 8. Right, as I alluded to and mentioned a little bit ago, remember you can just build a normal everyday console program, right? And then just have a little tile here that would say My Console App. But you click it, like I'm going to click on the developer command prompt, and bring you back to the desktop. See? So and that's another great question. Thank you for that. Because, yeah, I mean, even though we might see a tile on here, it doesn't mean they're all Metro apps, right? Like if I were to launch Visual Studio, it goes back to my desktop. Okay? So thank you very much for the questions there, folks. So you kind of get the idea of contracts from a super duper high level, right? Inter-app communication. already mentioned this a couple times. Remember, the little tile, it's not just your desktop icon. They want this to be a living, little breathing part of the application. Like you saw my rotating, like stock quotes came up and emails would pop up, you know, that kind of flavor. Okay, now we're going to get to the good part here in a second with the code. But just to kind of wrap up the final parts of those 8 little ideas for a Metro app, cloud storage is also being pushed really hard because, remember, you can log into your Metro account, if you will, through a Windows Live ID. So the idea here is that you should be able to go to any Windows 8 device, whether or not it's your particular device, log in with your ID, and get all your stuff back. Right? So these Metro apps are going to be leveraging the cloud to try to store that kind of stuff. Right? They don't have to, but that's like a suggestion. Okay. All right, now let's get to this part here. I know we got another talk to get through. Don't want to take up all your time. But the biggest thing I want to impress upon you guys about the programmer's mindset about doing this Metro application development, plain and simple, you're not doing .NET proper. Okay? Doesn't mean it's going to be a shift like it was from COM to .NET. Thank goodness. Right? That's how I lost all my hair. Trying to figure that out. Trying to figure that whole mess out, right? This is going to feel very, very similar. And I'll show you what the little magic is, all right? Remember that little portable library I showed you? Okay? Well, Microsoft made a really big portable library. It's called the .NET APIs for Metro-style apps. Okay? So I can get that point across real quick. For those of you that are already doing .NET development, probably looks kind of familiar, right? Okay? So when you build a Metro-style app, so if you go to Visual Studio 11, under Windows 8, you say, yes, give me a new Metro app. This whole technology stack will automatically be referenced. But it is a subset. Okay? It strips out anything which is not geared towards Metro. So you would not find any library that has to do with ASP.NET. That's not Metro, right? You're not going to see any library for Windows Forms. Not Metro, okay? It is a subset of core things that would work in the Metro universe. So far, so good? So you look at that and you say, wait now, what about the animations and the eye candy and the buttons and the list boxes? Where'd they go? Well, that's the new thing. That's this guy. Okay? Brand new technology drop called WinRT. Stands for Windows Runtime. Okay? WinRT is not .NET. It is not the CLR. It's a whole different beastie. Okay? There is a whole new stack of namespaces that are wrapped up in this Windows metadata format, and I'll describe that in just a minute. And as the root namespace is going to be Windows. So what's the root namespace for .NET? System. Root namespace for WinRT is always Windows. Okay? So when you're out there online and you're checking out the MSDN Metro class library stack, you see anything with the word Windows dot something, that means I'm only usable in Metro. Do not try this through a .NET app. It will not work. Okay? Now, here's the great news. I hope that a lot of you've been playing around with XAML to some level, whether you're doing Silverlight or WPF or something. If you have already gone down that road and you're working with XAML, you're in great shape. Even though they have a completely different set of libraries and namespaces that represent WinRT, it is going to be based on a very similar programming model to WPF. Okay? So if you have not already embraced XAML, the bell tolls for thee. Well, there's one way you can get out of it. I'll mention that part too. Okay? Now, I don't expect you to read that or see it. I just want to give you a quick little comparison of what's going on. So we got this whole huge new stack of namespaces that constitute all the bits that are not present from that .NET subset, right? So just to kind of hit the highlights, we have a huge body of namespaces for the presentation layer. Okay? Now, if you look, I know this is hard to read, but you probably say to yourself, gosh, that looks vaguely familiar, right? Because it is based on the technology set of WPF. Now, it's not .NET, but it's going to look like .NET, okay? Remember I talked about all these little, the touch language, right, that you kind of have to work with? There's a whole bunch of different namespaces for working with user interaction, okay? All those contracts and charms, right? Namespaces for that too. All the fancy graphics, and even here you can see XAML, XAML, XAML. Okay? Now again, I can't stress this enough. This is only for a Metro app. Okay? In fact, if you install Visual Studio 11 on Windows 7, you don't see any project templates for Metro or anything. It doesn't show them to you. You have to be under Windows 8 to see any of this Metro stuff. Right? So, I said there was a way out of it if you don't want to embrace XAML. Well, then you're going to be embracing HTML5. Okay? And this is actually pretty cool, I think. You know, I'm not much of an HTML guy. I do it, but I'd rather be over here in the XAML world. So here's what they've done, okay? They said, well, you know, we got these languages people already use and they seem to like, right? C#, VB, good languages. So if you want to go that direction, you can build your Metro-style apps by saying, I'm going to use C# or VB or C++, layer XAML on top of that, and now I'm going to build a Metro app. If you're more of a web-minded individual, you can say, I'm going to use JavaScript and HTML5, and now I'm going to build a Metro-style app. So they really did a nice way to kind of divide that up, right? So the web folks can come on along for the ride, the desktop folks can come along for the ride, and we're both tapping into that same WinRT subsystem. Get the idea? In fact, Blend 5, the new version of Blend that's going to be coming out, it now works with C++, C#, VB, and HTML5, JavaScript. Right? Now here's when I first saw this, I just laughed out, belly laughed, and I ran around and showed all my friends, look at this, it's a COM object, right? I spent so many years fighting with IUnknown and it's back. Now, thankfully, it is very, very under the covers. We will probably never actually directly see it. Okay. Remember I threw out that word language projection in the metadata, the Windows metadata format? Okay. So what happens here is that when you're using a language to communicate with WinRT, you're tapping into really like all these crazy Windows namespaces back here. They are all captured in one metadata file, WinMD format file, right? So it's actually pretty cool. The underlying operating system, the core kernel, is COM. But through the Windows metadata, it projects out into language-specific terms tokens that you'd understand. So we never see, like, think back to the COM interop layer. If you make a COM interop library, you don't ever see iClass factory, IUnknown. You just make the object. Same idea here, but much more streamlined. Right? So the part that, you know, I didn't mean to scare anybody. I kind of did. But, but the short answer is that when you're writing a Metro app with C#, it is going to feel like you're writing a good old .NET app. You use the namespaces, you make the types, class, interface, structure, union, delegate, and you write your code. You just have to use this whole different stack of technologies now to do it. Because these technologies are targeting Windows 8 and all the little COM objects in the background. Get the idea? Again, high level. Okay. So let me wrap this up pretty quick here. I think I'm getting pretty close. So let me just kind of show you an example of what you might be bumping into pretty quick. Am I virtual there? Yes. Okay. I wasn't sure where I was. Okay, so here I am with Visual Studio 11. And if I were to go File, New Project, you know, I get all my different Metro-style apps here, JavaScript, VB, C#, C++. And they give you some really nice templates to kind of get you going on your way here. Right? Just to save time, I'm just going to go simple. Let's just look at a class library. Because what I want to show you is just the metadata that you're tapping into. So I'm just going to make one of these real quick. Or as quick as the tool will let me. Okay. So things look pretty comfortable, right? Okay. .NET for a Metro-style app and Windows. Well, what is that little Windows thing? Note the path to Windows metadata. I would have grabbed that. Let's do this here. That's the guy. Windows.winmd. Okay? That's the guy that's responsible to work with the runtime to project out into language-specific syntax all those old COM objects. Transparently to us. Okay? So that one little thing that you're referencing, that was all those namespaces that I was listening in the background. Okay? Another totally bizarre thing that I won't bore you with the reasons why because I don't quite understand them all myself. But if we were to go to the object browser, notice here I'm looking at the .NET for Metro Styles app subset. We all know what MS Core Lib is, yes? Hey, look, all the namespaces are completely empty. But look, they have new libraries that have the exact same names as the old namespaces. MS Core Lib is now just a shell. It's a hub. And that's what makes things portable. Because if you're under .NET 4, or any version of .NET, you've got to have MS Core Lib. So you have to have a reference in your manifest for MS Core Lib. But if you're tapping into Windows 8, you're not doing CLR. You're doing Windows 8 WinRT, right? So with a little bit of magic and scrubbing, what they basically said is, well, we're going to refactor this like a lot to make it transparent to the runtime. You know what I'm saying? So just like, if you reference the library under this OS, you're going to get this. Under that OS, you get that. Kind of a weird deal. And then I were to go to Windows 8. There's WinMD. There are all the Windows namespaces. Right? Geolocation, all our XAML things down below, input, controls, start screen, XAML. Right? So, different world, for sure. Still with me? I know we just got this short amount of time, but yeah. Let me just wrap it up here then. All right, so let's say that you've decided, yes, I think it makes sense for our company to invest time to build a Metro-style app. Now what do we do? Right? It's done. Now what? Well, if you want to make money off this thing, you're going to want to get it up to the App Store. Right? Just like if you have an iOS device, you can go to the Apple Store and download a bazillion things. If you have a Windows Phone device, you can go to the Windows Phone Store. Same idea here. Right? When you're actually in the Windows Start page for Windows 8, one of your little tiles is the store, the App Store, right? Which is very barren right now because it's not really out yet. Okay, but I'm sure there's a lot of things in the queue. So you're going to be building these applications to get them uploaded to the App Store to make money on them. Okay, so a couple cool things here is that it's already set up to be a global market. Microsoft handles a lot of the conversion currency details for you. Okay, so that's kind of a nice gotcha. Bad news, you got to show a little bit of money, right? So just like if you're doing iOS development, you have to have an Apple developer license. Same idea here, but it's pretty marginal for a single programmer, $50 a year, right? For a company, $100 a year, that's not too bad at all. Now, once you actually build your amazingly cool Metro app, you got your license, you upload it, well, you're not going to make money just yet. you're going to go through a large vetting process, which is good. We want to keep it all honest. And I just want to point out a couple of things that I found a little surprising, but kind of reassuring. Again, I tried to put the red for the things I want you to try to look at here. But the first one I want to point out is the guy in the dead middle. You can only use Metro-style APIs. I'm not sure what that's going to exactly mean for third-party stuff. You know, is it going to be considered a Metro-style API if we subclass off of Metro types to build a new library? Probably. But what about things like maybe Mono? Not sure. Right? So keep that in mind. Okay. What else here? Touch, the one right below it. Remember, you got to have touch support, which for a lot of us, myself included, a little bit new. I'm used to double-clicking everything, right? Now we got to think about swiping and spinning things. Okay. This is a good thing. No adult content. That's the last one, right? Be nice. That's the second to the last thing, right? And, you know, the app has to be fully functional. You can't throw out some goofy, broken thing and like, well, spend an extra $100 to give you the real thing. That won't make it through. Yeah, Microsoft. Don't do what Microsoft does. And the other pieces there you can kind of read up on. Another nice thing, too, the one I like, you can't go bonkers with ads. Your tile can't be an ad rotator. That will not get received. You can have an ad or two in your app in the right context, but no, it's not going to be an ad rotator. Thank goodness. And, oh, by the way, too, when you install the SDK for Windows 8, there's a whole certification toolkit that is installed as well. It'll kind of test your app kind of on the spot a little bit, kind of like when we're working with looking at best practices, right? FX Cop, same idea in a way. Okay, so to wrap it really, really up, sorry I went a little bit long there. What do we do now? Right? How do we get prepared for all this? Well, here are the things that I'm trying to do right now. I mean, no one here but us chickens, right? This is pretty new stuff, so I'm learning too. If you are a .NET programmer today, doing whatever, ASP.NET, whatever, right? If you're a .NET person, embrace your XAML now. You just have to do it. Number two, embrace Blend now. You have to do it. Because if you want to get those fancy animations and the fancy eye candy and the spinning graphics, if you want to write that yourself in Visual Studio, have fun. We'll talk to you in about 3 months, because it ain't going to happen, right? That's brutal, brutal markup. Blend has built-in tools to do it for you on the fly, right? So do that. Start to figure out that subset, because it's different, right? If you're more of a web person, embrace your HTML5. Can't go 4, gotta go 5, right? Go deep into your JavaScript, right? No more than making a method. Get into all the crazy weirdnesses, right? Also, embrace Blend 5. Remember, Blend 5 works for HTML5 and XAML, right? So that's kind of a cool thing, too. Well, now that we're all thoroughly nervous and thinking about what's to come, thank you very much for coming. I'll be able to answer questions, but I better wrap it up.